The explosions tore through the surface of Ferrari, mushroom clouds rising as the missiles reached their destinations. Admiral Krasuk watched the visual streaming into the command deck, his furred ears twitching with agitation. Each impact was a deliberate strike, timed to dismantle vital ground infrastructure without triggering mass casualties. Still, it was a precision that unnerved him. These humans weren't fighting like a disorganized, technologically inferior species. Captain Hussein Krasuk barked, addressing his reptilian subordinate. How close are we to neutralizing their planetary defenses? Hussein's elongated muzzle turned toward him, pupils contracting. Neutralizing? They've switched to guerrilla tactics, sir. Their missiles weren't just meant to strike their delivering troops. I estimate several thousand human soldiers are already on the surface. Their targets are our bases. We're the ones being hunted now. Krasuk's ear tufts stiffened as the implications sank in. Guerrilla warfare. A race with no formal spacefaring capability was now capable of launching precision strikes against an empire that spanned hundreds of star systems. The thought should have been laughable, but the situation was far from amusing. Any luck tracing their supply chain? Krasuk asked. If they've developed countergrav and FTL in secret, they must be receiving aid from somewhere. No direct supply lines have been detected, Intelligence Officer Raul replied, flicking through streams of intercepted transmissions. But their portal network complicates things. They can shift resources and troops across vast distances without warning. Every time we target what seems to be a critical node, it evaporates. Krasuk sighed, his gaze narrowing as he stared at the tactical map projected before him. The humans' ability to adapt, innovate, and resist was growing more problematic by the hour. What had started as a straightforward invasion was spiraling into a costly entanglement. They're preparing for something, Raul continued. I believe they're trying to make this planet the linchpin in a broader resistance. Krasuk tapped his claws rhythmically against his console, deep in thought. If they can reverse engineer countergrav from the wreckage of our ships, it's only a matter of time before they push the fight back into space. Before anyone could respond, the ship's alert system blared and a holo display flickered to life. It showed several of the humans boarding missiles breaching their ship's hulls. The interior cameras caught the silhouettes of soldiers in exosuits, heavily armed, making their way through corridors that should have been impenetrable. They're boarding us, Hussein muttered in disbelief. Right under our noses, Krasuk's fur bristled with alarm. Get me a full assessment of our losses. Raul's fingers danced over the controls, scanning reports. We're seeing breaches on multiple decks. Human troops are moving fast, disabling key systems, mainly targeting weapons and communication relays. They're cutting us off from the fleet, Krasuk realized. Raul, how quickly can we restore comms? Not fast enough. They've isolated us in orbit, Raul answered grimly. And with their planetary defenses still active, we're out of options for a quick retreat. Hussein's tail twitched anxiously. We need to regroup and counterattack before they hit our engines. If they gain control of one of the capital ships, we're dead in the void. Krasuk finished for him, already planning their next move. Order all available personnel to fall back to critical zones. We'll fortify key positions and purge any boarding parties we find. Hussein bared his fangs in agreement, already relaying orders to the fleet. We should assume they'll try to sabotage our primary FTL drives. They know as well as we do that losing the ability to leave this system traps us here. The Admiral's eyes narrowed, considering the implications. Their FTL tech was still the key advantage the wing over Haromasi had over these humans, but for how long? The moment that gap closed, this war would take on an entirely new shape, one in which the humans would be fighting on equal footing. Suddenly, the holo display flickered again, this time with a direct communication line opening from Ferrari. The image was grainy, distorted by the atmosphere's interference, but President Chen's face became visible. The human leader didn't waste any time. Admiral Krasuk, I understand you're still intent on occupying our planet. Krasuk glared at the screen. That was the intention. It seems you've made that far more difficult than anticipated. Chen's expression was unreadable, but his voice was steady, calm. You'll find that's only going to get worse. Your ground forces are already overextended, and we've only just begun introducing you to our military capabilities. If you retreat now, you might still salvage something. Krasuk's ear twitched. You overestimate your position, human. We've crushed far more formidable civilizations, and yet. Chen countered, we're still here. We've evacuated millions of civilians underground, and those left behind are more than capable of fighting. Our technology might seem primitive to you, but we've learned how to adapt. We've studied your tactics, your weaknesses. Raoul leaned in, whispering urgently, he's bluffing, Admiral. Their tech doesn't suggest they're capable of sustaining this kind of resistance. Krasuk hesitated. Chen's calm demeanor was unnerving. Humans were not supposed to be this resilient. If their entire strategy hinged on bluffing, then they were desperate. But the fact that they were still holding out after the orbital strikes and now launching boarding actions suggested otherwise. Even if you win here, Chen said, his voice taking on a more ominous tone, your empire will bleed for it. Every world you take will fight you and will spread our innovations faster than you can suppress them. Do you really want to risk the possibility that we'll learn to outpace you? Krasuk considered the statement carefully. Was this truly the fate of the wing over Hiromacy? To face wave after wave of increasingly adaptive enemies, each one leveraging the innovations of the last. I have one last card to play, Chen said quietly, his face inching closer to the screen. We've cracked part of your counter-gravity technology. You won't be the only ones flying high for long. Raoul's eyes widened. Impossible. Why? Krasuk felt the weight of those words sink into him. If the humans had indeed made breakthroughs in countergrav, even partial, they could reverse the tide of this war. And with their knack for innovation, it wouldn't take long before they weaponized it. The communication line went dead. Krasuk stood motionless for a moment, lost in thought. Then, with a growl, he slammed a fist into the console, fur bristling, ordered the fleet into defensive formations. We're withdrawing from orbit. Hussein looked at him in shock. Withdraw. But Admiral Krasuk's voice was cold, calculated. They'll be coming for us soon. This is no longer a conquest, it's an arms race. As his orders were relayed throughout the fleet, Krasuk couldn't help but feel the weight of what was to come. The humans had managed to turn a simple occupation into a conflict that could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. And as he watched Ferrari's surface shrink beneath them, he knew this war had only just begun. As the ships of the wing over Hiromacy retreated from the orbital range of Ferrari, Admiral Krasuk felt the weight of his decision settle over him. The stars outside the viewport shimmered indifferently, but inside the command deck, a palpable tension gripped the air. Every officer and crew member aboard knew that they had just crossed into uncharted territory. This was no longer a simple conquest. The humans had become something far more dangerous. Raoul, the intelligence officer, paced in front of the tactical display, his frustration obvious. I still don't understand how they did it, Admiral. There's no evidence they had the capacity to reverse engineer our countergrav tech. At least not this quickly. Krasuk's claws tapped lightly on the console as he stared at the retreating planet on the holographic map. They're not operating on normal timelines, Raoul. Their innovation rate is higher than we expected. Faster than we've ever seen. Hussein, the captain of the fleet's planetary troops, let out a low hiss. If they've adapted that quickly, we're already in trouble. They could hit us from any angle, and we won't be able to predict it. The Admiral's ear tufts twitched in thought. That's why we're pulling back. We need time. Time to regroup, assess, and figure out just how much they've learned. and more importantly, how much they can weaponize. Raoul glanced at his console. We still have a few minutes until we're fully out of range of their surface-to-space artillery. Their last salvo was close. Too close, Krasuk clenched his jaw. Good, it'll give us some breathing room to prepare. Silence settled over the bridge for a few moments, but the unease lingered like a specter in the back of their minds. Hussein finally spoke, breaking the tension. What about the intelligence reports on the planetary bunkers? Those missiles. They weren't just strikes. They were meant to punch through and deliver troops Raoul's side, pulling up the most recent data. Their bunker networks were largely hit, but there's still one major installation intact. It's heavily shielded, likely their command center, and the worst part is that their forces are regrouping fast. They've mastered guerrilla tactics on the ground, using the terrain to their advantage. If we try to reoccupy the planet now, it'll be a bloodbath. Krasuk nodded slowly, his mind already turning over the possibilities. We need to focus on containment for now. Make sure they can't spread beyond Ferrari. Keep their innovations locked to this system. That'll be easier said than done, Admiral Raoul said grimly. If they've already cracked part of our counter-grav tech, it's only a matter of time before they start testing ways to push beyond their planetary borders, and with their knack for rapid adaptation. Krasuk finished for him. It won't take long before they find a way to replicate it and scale up. If they get their hands on full FTL capabilities, we'll have more than a rebellion on our hands. We'll have a war that could destabilize the entire galactic hierarchy. Hussein crossed his arms, his reptilian eyes narrowing. What do you propose? We don't have enough ground forces left to retake the planet without reinforcements. And with their ingenuity, they'll just keep adapting. We'll be fighting a losing battle. Krasuk turned his gaze from the tactical display, his eyes hardening. We need to hit them where it hurts before they gain too much momentum. But we won't do it with brute force. Raoul frowned. You're thinking of sabotage? Subterfuge, something like that, Krasuk replied. We've been too visible, too obvious. It's time we use the same tactics they've employed against us. If we can't overpower them, we'll undermine them. The intelligence officer leaned forward. You want to destabilize them from within? Use their divisions, these factions President Chen mentioned. Krasuk nodded. Exactly. The humans have shown us that they aren't a united force. They're fractured. Chen himself admitted that none of them can command a full surrender without negotiating with all of their factions. We use that to our advantage. Hussein's tail flicked in understanding. Divide and conquer precisely, Krasuk said, his eyes cold and calculating. We'll exploit their political structure. Find the factions most willing to deal. Offer them something valuable, technology, resources, whatever we need to dangle in front of them. We won't win this war by fighting every human on the planet. We'll turn them against each other. Raoul raised a skeptical brow. And what happens when the other factions catch wind of this? We could just as easily unite them against us. Krasuk's grin was feral. That's the risk we take. But we'll be subtle, quiet. We only need to win over a few key players. If we can destabilize their leadership long enough to disrupt their resistance, we'll have the upper hand. Raoul nodded, understanding dawning on his face. So we make it seem like the factions are already turning on each other. Play them against one another, weaken their resolve. Exactly, Krasuk said, leaning back in his chair. If they start fighting amongst themselves, we won't have to lift a finger to conquer them. They'll tear themselves apart. Hussein's grin matched his admiral's. And while they're distracted, we can quietly sabotage their efforts. Take out their counter-grav research before it becomes a problem. Correct, Krasuk affirmed. We'll keep their technology under control, cripple their supply lines, and sow enough discord to keep them from uniting. All without a full-scale invasion. Raoul straightened. It'll take time to gather the intelligence we need. I'll deploy infiltration units immediately. We'll need to identify key leaders and factions that are more susceptible to persuasion. Do it, Krasuk ordered. We don't have the luxury of waiting. Every day they innovate, they get closer to leveling the playing field. We have to act now. As Raoul left the bridge to begin his preparations, Hussein remained, arms crossed and tail coiled tightly. Admiral, one thing bothers me. Krasuk raised a brow. What's that? Their president, Chen. He's too calm, too calculated. It feels like he's waiting for something, like he knows we're pulling back to regroup. Krasuk nodded, his gaze darkening. He's playing a long game, Hussein, just like we are. But that's what makes this interesting. The humans think they've turned the tables on us, that will falter in the face of their ingenuity. He leaned forward, eyes gleaming with a mixture of determination and caution. But what they don't realize is that we've been fighting wars for centuries, and we've never lost. On the surface of Ferrari, President Chen stood on the observation platform of the last standing command bunker, staring up at the sky as the distant glimmer of the wing over Hiromasi's ships receded. The evacuation was underway, but they hadn't left for good. Not yet. He turned as General Marshall, the leader of one of the more militaristic human factions, approached. "They're pulling back," Marshall said, his voice a deep rumble. "But they'll be back," Chen nodded. "I know. They've underestimated us, but they're adjusting." "Their retreat is only temporary, then what's the plan?" Marshall asked. "We've hit them hard, but they're not broken." Chen's eyes narrowed as he watched the last of the alien ships slip out of visual range. "We keep preparing, keep innovating, and when they return, we'll have a few surprises waiting for them." The general smiled grimly. "And if they try to play us against each other," Chen's expression hardened, "then we give them something they won't expect. We fight back together." He turned and walked away from the platform, his mind already spinning with the possibilities. The wing over Hiromasi might have the upper hand now, but the humans weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for dominance. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. For every comment that says, we will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.